8 houses, 8 investigations. 8 homes, 8 families. 8 people who were supposed to be safe, killed by someone who shared their last name. This is Truth 2 Bear Crime Stories, and today we are breaking down 8 real homicide investigations from across the United States, all from the year 2000 to now. No dramatization, no guesswork, just the evidence, the forensics, and the courtroom record. Let's get into it. Case 1. Scott Peterson. No blood, no weapon, no confession, and still a conviction. That is where we start. On Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, 2002, 27-year-old Lacey Peterson, 8 months pregnant, was reported missing from her home in Modesto, California. Her husband, Scott Lee Peterson, said he had spent the morning fishing at the Berkeley Marina, roughly 90 miles from home, and returned to find her gone. Within hours, the case became a national story. Investigators followed standard procedure, beginning with the person closest to the victim. They searched the Peterson home, his vehicle, his boat, his warehouse, and his office, more than once. According to reporting reviewed by the American Bar Association, none of those searches produced blood, tissue, or forensic material connected to an assault. This is worth stating plainly. This case would not be built on physical trace evidence. It would be built on behavior, timelines, and circumstantial evidence. Detectives pulled phone and computer records to verify Scott Peterson's whereabouts. They placed GPS tracking devices on his vehicles. They obtained court authorization for wiretaps on his phone lines. And then came a name that would define the case: Amber Frey, a massage therapist from Fresno. Frey had met Peterson on the 20th of November 2002, about 6 weeks before Lacey disappeared. She testified that on the 9th of December, Peterson told her he was a widower, facing his first Christmas without his wife. His wife was still alive at that point. Frey contacted police on the 30th of December 2002 and cooperated fully. Recorded phone calls between her and Peterson were later played in open court. Then in April, the case turned. On the 13th of April 2003, the remains of a male fetus were recovered along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay in Richmond. The next day, a human torso was found roughly 1 mile away. On the 18th of April 2003, DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, whom the couple had planned to name Connor. The autopsies were conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson. No relation to the family. And here is the detail investigators could not ignore. The remains surfaced near the exact area Scott Peterson claimed he had been fishing that morning. He was arrested that same day, the 18th of April 2003. When taken into custody, he had altered his appearance, and he was carrying camping gear, multiple cell phones, his brother's identification, and a large amount of cash. He was charged with first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for Connor. Because of overwhelming publicity, the trial was relocated from Modesto to Redwood City in San Mateo County. Over 6 months in 2004, prosecutors built their case around Peterson's own statements and conduct, the fishing story, the affair, and the inconsistencies that piled up the more he talked. The defense argued the opposite, that there was no forensic link to their client, and that law enforcement had zeroed in on him too quickly. On the 12th of November 2004, the jury convicted Scott Peterson on both counts. In the penalty phase, jurors recommended death. On the 16th of March 2005, Judge Alfred DeLucchi formally sentenced him to death, but the story did not end at sentencing. In August of 2020, the California Supreme Court upheld the murder convictions but struck down the death sentence, ruling that potential jurors had been improperly excluded simply for expressing general reservations about capital punishment. On the 8th of December, 2021, Peterson was resentenced to life without parole. In 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project took on his case, and a judge later approved limited additional DNA testing on existing evidence. Peterson continues to maintain his innocence, and his case remains under active legal review. That means what we've just described is not necessarily the final chapter. It's the record as it stands today. What made this case so difficult to prosecute is exactly what makes it worth studying. There was no smoking gun. Investigators had to build an entire circumstantial case from phone records, GPS data, wiretaps, testimony, and geography, and it held up through nearly 2 decades of appeals. That is the power and the limitation of circumstantial evidence in an American courtroom. Case 2. Christopher Watts. A neighbor's home security camera did what a father's own explanation could not. It told the truth. In August of 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, 34-year-old Shanann Watts, who was pregnant, and her 2 young daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, were reported missing. It was a family friend, Nicole Atkinson, who raised the alarm. After Shanann missed a medical appointment and stopped responding to calls, Atkinson contacted police on the 13th of August, 2018.
County Communications.
My name's Nicole, and I'm calling because I'm concerned about a friend of mine. She's not answering the door, she's not responding to text messages, phone calls, and there's no movement in the house whatsoever.
Investigators turned their attention to Shanann's husband, Christopher Watts, almost immediately. His demeanor during a televised appeal for information raised concern among the team, including Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Tammy Lee, who moved to bring him in for direct questioning. This is where technology entered the case in a decisive way. A neighbor, Nathaniel Trinastich, provided footage from his own home surveillance system. That footage showed Christopher Watts backing his truck into the garage and loading it in the early hours of the morning, activity that directly contradicted his account that his wife and daughters had left the home later, during the day. When investigators reviewed the footage with Watts present, the neighbor later said Watts appeared agitated rather than cooperative. That same night, detectives pulled his phone and computer records and discovered an undisclosed relationship with a coworker, which he had denied. That coworker, Nicole Kessinger, came forward voluntarily and handed over text messages that supported the timeline investigators were building. On the 15th of August, 2018, the FBI joined the investigation. Agent Tammy Lee administered a polygraph examination to Watts. It's important to be precise here. Polygraph results are not admissible as courtroom evidence in these proceedings. Their value was strictly investigative, a tool to apply pressure and gauge consistency, not proof of guilt in a legal sense. Investigators told Watts he had failed. He asked to speak with his father. What followed was an initial admission, one that was later proven to be false. Eventually, he led investigators to the Anadarko Petroleum worksite where he was employed. Shanann Watts's remains were recovered from a shallow grave on the property. The remains of the 2 children were recovered from nearby oil storage tanks. The case file that followed was massive, later reported to include more than 2,000 pages of documentation, over 650 photographs, more than 200 hours of video footage, and dozens of hours of recorded interviews. Autopsy findings, combined with a digital timeline reconstructed from phones, cameras, and location data, supported the prosecution's account in full. On the 6th of November, 2018, Christopher Watts pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body.
Showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances.
The plea agreement removed the possibility of a death sentence, a resolution that involved direct input from Shanann's own parents. On the 19th of November 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life terms without parole, 3 of them to run consecutively, along with additional years for the remaining charges. In February of 2019, in a recorded prison interview, Watts gave investigators a more complete account of events.
Did it seem like it was that long, 2 to 4 minutes?
Felt like it was longer almost, because it felt like time was standing still. Like a snap, something unreal.
So what happened next? What she said? What'd you tell me?
For the 2 children in this case, we are stating only what is necessary. Both girls, ages 4 and 3, died. Our focus remains on how the investigation was conducted and how the legal process unfolded, not on the circumstances of their deaths. This case is frequently cited in law enforcement training because of how quickly digital evidence, a neighbor's camera, phone metadata, a coworker's texts, closed the gap between a false public statement and the truth. It took investigators roughly 48 hours to move from a missing persons report to a confirmed homicide investigation, almost entirely because of technology that wasn't controlled by the person under suspicion. Case 3. Alex Murdaugh. A locked phone, a 4-digit birthday, and a voice on a recording that a powerful family attorney spent months denying was his own. On the 7th of June 2021, 52-year-old Margaret Maggie Murdaugh and her 22-year-old son, Paul Murdaugh, died from gunshot wounds near the dog kennels on the family's rural property, known as Moselle, in Colleton County, South Carolina. The 911 call reporting the deaths came from Richard Alexander, Alex Murdaugh.
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
47 Moselle Road in Allison?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay?
Alex Murdaugh,
Yes, sir.
Maggie's husband, Paul's father, and a prominent attorney from a family with deep ties to the local legal system for generations. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, took the lead. From his very first statement, Alex Murdaugh told investigators, including Senior Special Agent David Owen, that he had not been at the kennels that evening.
Probably a little bit on the later side of that. But I guess I know Maggie got up early to get out of there because she had an appointment in Charleston. Just don't remember if I left right after she did or...
He said he had stayed at the main house, taken a nap, and only later left to visit his elderly mother. The case would ultimately turn on a single object, a cell phone. Paul Murdaugh had recorded a short video at the kennels shortly before the deaths occurred. That phone was locked, and it took investigators weeks to gain access. According to testimony reported by NBC News, SLED agent Britt Dove received Paul's iPhone on the 13th of August 2021, roughly 9.5 weeks after the killings. The passcode turned out to be 6 digits, Paul's own birth date. Once inside, investigators recovered a video that captured the voices of Maggie, Paul, and, as multiple witnesses would later identify in court, Alex Murdaugh himself. That placed him at the kennels minutes before the deaths, directly contradicting the story he had told police from day one. Prosecutors built their timeline using data pulled from all 3 phones, the victim's and Murdaugh's own, combined with ballistics testimony from SLED regarding the type of firearms involved. 2 important gaps remained throughout the case. The weapons used were never recovered, and there were no eyewitnesses. The prosecution's theory centered on mounting financial pressure, Murdaugh was facing an imminent reckoning over money taken from his own clients, and prosecutors argued the killings were, in part, an attempt to redirect attention. The trial began on the 25th of January, 2023, and ran 28 days, with dozens of witnesses called. Murdaugh took the stand in his own defense. After months of public denial, he acknowledged under oath that it was indeed his voice on the kennel recording. On the 2nd of March 2023, after less than 3 hours of jury deliberation, he was found guilty on 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possessing a weapon during a violent crime.
The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, indictment for murder, verdict, guilty.
The following day, the 3rd of March 2023, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Now here is a development that must be reported with complete accuracy. On the 13th of May, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court unanimously overturned Murdaugh's murder convictions and ordered a new trial. The court found that Colleton County Clerk of Court Rebecca Becky Hill had improperly influenced the jury during deliberations. Conduct the court itself described as interference, writing that she had, in the court's words, placed her influence on the scale of justice. Hill had earlier, in December of 2025, pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, perjury, and misconduct in office. Murdaugh remains incarcerated on separate financial crime convictions unrelated to the murder charges. A retrial has been scheduled, reported for the 5th of April 2027. As of this recording, the murder convictions have been vacated, and Murdaugh is, under the law, presumed innocent of those specific charges pending that retrial. This is an active, evolving legal matter, and we will continue to follow it as new developments are confirmed. Case 4. Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nicholas Godejohn. An internet protocol address led police from Missouri to a house in Wisconsin, and to a secret relationship no one in the victim's life knew existed. In June of 2015, 48-year-old Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard died from injuries at her home in Springfield, Missouri. Her daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, then 23, had for years been presented to their community as severely ill and disabled. Investigators would come to learn that presentation was false, a pattern later widely discussed by medical professionals as factitious disorder imposed on another, in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care. The investigation opened with a piece of digital evidence meant to attract attention. On the 14th of June 2015, concerning posts appeared on Dee Dee Blanchard's Facebook account. A friend alerted authorities, and sheriff's deputies, after securing a search warrant, discovered Dee Dee's body that same night. Gypsy Rose was not present at the scene, and neighbors initially feared she, too, had been harmed. A family friend, Aaliyah Woodmansee, came forward with a name, Nicholas Godejohn, describing a secret online relationship Gypsy had been keeping private. With that lead, investigators asked Facebook to trace the internet protocol address behind the alarming posts. According to reporting from Fox 4KC and other outlets, that address led to Big Bend, Wisconsin. On the 15th of June 2015, law enforcement in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, located both Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nicholas Godejohn at his residence. Both were taken into custody. The two had met on a Christian dating website back in 2012 and had maintained the relationship in secret for years. Digital forensics became the backbone of establishing premeditation. A search warrant, later unsealed, revealed Gypsy had operated at least 5 separate Facebook accounts under different names. A computer analyst testified that Godejohn's own computer held relevant search history, and that hundreds of text messages exchanged between the two discussed planning, including specific questions about the layout of Dee Dee's room and her sleeping patterns. Investigators also determined the weapon had been mailed to Godejohn's Wisconsin address inside an envelope. Detectives recovered it in a closet during a search of his bedroom, alongside cash taken from the Blanchard home. A bloodied glove, worn during the incident and bearing a cut that matched an injury on Godejohn's finger, was entered as physical evidence. The two defendants took very different paths through the legal system. In July of 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard pleaded guilty to second-degree murder
You plead to the Class A felony of murder in the second degree.
and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She later testified at Godejohn's trial that she had planned the incident and, in her own words, had persuaded him to carry it out. Nicholas Godejohn went to trial in November of 2018. Jurors were shown roughly 90 minutes of his recorded interrogation.
Actually, stab him. I love it.
On the 16th of November 2018, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. On the 22nd of February 2019, Greene County Judge David Jones sentenced him to life without parole.
I'm the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, guilty of murder in the first degree,
plus an additional 25 years for the armed criminal action charge. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was released on parole on the 28th of December 2023, after serving the majority of her 10-year sentence. What makes this case a frequent subject of forensic training is the Internet Protocol trace itself, a single piece of digital geolocation data that collapsed the distance between two states and connected a Facebook post to a physical address within about 24 hours. Case 5. Richard Dabate. A wristband recorded 10,000 steps after its wearer was supposedly already gone. That contradiction became known nationally as the Fitbit case. On the 23rd of December 2015, 39-year-old Connie Dabate died from gunshot injuries inside her home on Birchview Drive in Ellington, Connecticut, while the couple's two young sons were at school. Her husband, Richard Dabate, a computer network administrator, reported the event, telling police that a masked intruder had entered the home, killed his wife, and restrained him to a chair. When Connecticut State Police arrived around 10 o'clock that morning, responding to a panic alarm triggered through the home security system, they found Richard Dabate with one wrist and both ankles secured to a folding chair, along with superficial injuries. He described a timeline placing his wife's death shortly after 9 o'clock that same morning.
I yelled to her to get out of the house. My wife didn't run. She must have ran into the basement because we have 2 guns in the house. One was in the basement in a lockbox and one's in our closet. She ran downstairs.
Here is where the case earned its name. Connie Dabate had been wearing a Fitbit fitness tracker clipped to her waistband that morning. The device recorded her steps, distance traveled, and general movement. That data showed she was active inside the home until roughly 5 minutes past 10 in the morning, about 1 hour after her husband claimed she had already been killed. That single contradiction became the foundation the entire prosecution was built around. But the Fitbit was only one piece of a much larger digital picture. Investigators reconstructed a minute-by-minute timeline using multiple independent sources. The home security system logged exactly when it was armed, disarmed, and when the panic alarm was triggered, recorded at approximately 12 minutes past 10 in the morning, activated by Richard Dabate's own key fob. Internet Protocol data showed that emails he claimed to have sent from the roadside were, in fact, sent from the home's internet network. Facebook activity showed Connie posting videos and messages from inside the house that same morning. Investigators also pulled cell phone records tied to a woman Richard Dabate was involved with, discovering he had been communicating with her through a separate Google Voice number, and that she was pregnant with his child. Prosecutors presented this as establishing motive. The trial itself took years to reach court, delayed first by the coronavirus pandemic, and then by the dismissal of an earlier seated jury. The 5-week trial finally began on the 5th of April, 2022, in Rockville Superior Court. According to the Connecticut Supreme Court's later written decision, jurors heard testimony from 130 witnesses and reviewed 600 separate exhibits. The defense challenged the reliability of the Fitbit data itself and pointed to unidentified DNA recovered from the home, including from the weapon. On the 10th of May 2022, after roughly 3 hours of deliberation spread across 2 days, the 12-member jury found Richard DeBatte guilty of murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. On the 18th of August 2022, Judge Corinne Klatt sentenced him to 65 years in prison. In 2025, the Connecticut Supreme Court, in a unanimous 6-0 decision, upheld the conviction, while noting certain instances of prosecutorial conduct during trial that the court described as concerning, though not severe enough to have denied DeBatte a fair trial overall. This case remains a central reference point in digital forensics training, specifically because of how many independent data streams, a wearable device, a security system log, an internet protocol address, and social media activity were cross-referenced against a single suspect's stated timeline, and how completely that timeline fell apart under scrutiny.